So what I want to talk with you about today is the world of radio and the change that it's undergoing. I think that certainly within the music industry, I think there's no more important and more profound change than this transformation that's hitting what is really the largest piece of the pie in the music industry. And it's an equally profound change in terms of advertising, because as you know, the radio industry is an enormous category. And, look at my clicker. As a musician, someone who was in rock bands for many, many years, it's also something that excites me greatly in terms of the implications this change brings to your average working musician. So I think on a lot of fronts, a very exciting transformation. Good. Wow, so PowerPoint on top of a video. So I want to start with a, can we get the, there we go. I want to start with a simple statistic that I think will probably surprise a lot of people. It surprised me when I first heard about it. And that is that average American listens to something like 16, 17 hours of music a week. And 80% of those hours are spent on radio. And that's as true today as it was decades ago. So in spite of really an enormous number of pretty amazing inventions in the world of on-demand listening, the sort of mobility, MP3s, iTunes, Rhapsody, Spotify, Napster, all these ways to take and consume music that you own, the portion of time that you spend listening to your collection has remained pretty much constant at about 20% of your overall hours with music. So in spite of all that, radio remains the pipeline to music. And I think that's for a couple reasons. One, it's free, of course. Secondly, it's very, very easy. You hit a button and music comes out. And music is primarily a background activity, so simplicity, sort of ease of use is very, very important to its consumption. And thirdly, radio has always provided, I think, a wealth of discovery. It's where people discover new music. And I think those three ingredients have meant that radio has sort of held its ground in the face of all of these, I think, pretty extraordinary evolutions on the digital side. Now, I think that industry is undergoing the first major transformation since its invention decades ago. And at the core of that transformation is personalization. And what's happening with radio is we're migrating from an industry or a technology that is broadcast, where you're streaming one signal to many, and people are tuning in to a radio station, to unicast, where people are able to receive, curate, sort of manage their own individual radio station. It's a radically different approach to radio consumption. And it's my firm opinion that this new form of listening, personalized, IP-delivered radio, is going to eventually replace broadcast. I think once you've got a taste of a radio station that's curated and really refined just for you, it's hard to imagine kind of going back to a form of listening that really doesn't know you and is programming for 500,000 people simultaneously. So personalization is at the very, very heart of Pandora. And for us, it starts with something called the Music Genome Project. So if you came to Pandora on any given day, you'd see, among other things, a group of musicians in front of computers with headphones on. And their job at Pandora is to come in every day, listen to songs one at a time, and analyze those songs along as many as 450 musical attributes per song. So they manually sit down and dissect and measure every element of melody and harmony and rhythm and form and instrumentation, the vocal performance, really kind of all the attributes that if you put them together, give you this piece of music. So these are trained musicians, typically folks with at least a college degree in music, very solid music theory chops, and they spend their time collecting musical DNA. And they've been doing it for about 12 years now. This then, each time they analyze a piece of music, they add that music into our large database. So in the database, you now have a collection of songs represented by a string of numbers. The actual challenge we set out for ourselves was to be able to lay out this template, and by looking at it, hear the music in our head. So this string of numbers then becomes the hook that we marry with mathematics to build playlists. So when any of you out there launch your radio station and type in a song, the Music Genome Project computes proximity from that song to everything else in our collection, and then starts sequencing songs based on kind of a sensible musicological playlist. So it's using sort of the musical basis of songs to make a playlist. And this approach, I think, has a couple of very distinct advantages. The first is that it's simple. You can type in one song and you're done. So it's trying to approximate the ease of radio. You do that, your work is done. You can sit back and it will deliver a pretty well-targeted stream of music. If you want to, you can kind of lean in and start using your thumbs and sort of refine it further, but it kind of it checks the box for simplicity. The second thing is that it's a great way to power discovery. Because one of the things about this approach is that musicologically driven system is blind to popularity. So in our collection now, there are over 900,000 songs. And when you launch a station and we pick what song to play next, the genome is blind to whether that artist is a well-known artist or a completely undiscovered artist. And of the 90,000 artists in our collection, 70% of them are independent. So it's surfacing, what people talk about as a long tail in a really substantial way. And for a listener, that means that you're getting discovery. You're discovering new music. And I would argue that discovery is kind of the key to an enduring passion for music. I think most of us, as we get older, start working, get busy, we kind of lose that ability, that sort of resource for discovery, and music kind of recedes into the background, so it becomes wallpaper for us. Well, when you have a system that can actually sort of regularly bring you new songs, new artists you've never heard before, I think it's very energizing, and we see that in our listeners. So this is the foundation for how we personalize at Pandora. And we've taken personalization as a theme and brought that to how we talk to consumers. So we launched this service actually in the fall of 2005. And we decided that because this was a personalized service, we were going to engage with our listeners at a personal level sort of throughout the organization. So anytime anybody wanted to talk to us, write us an email, make a phone call, send us a care package, complain, have ideas, et cetera, we would respond individually to every single inquiry. And we would do that both virtually, through email and on the phone, but also in person. And so one of the things that we did shortly after launch, we began hosting town hall meetings for Pandora listeners. This is one such meeting here. This is actually a cafe in Des Moines, Iowa. I have been hosting these town hall meetings since we launched. I've done about 300 of them now. And we've hosted them in small towns like this, in Biloxi, Mississippi, as well as New York City. And they are essentially kind of opportunities for a very informal, in-person, sort of face-to-face conversation with listeners. The very first one I did was in Midtown Manhattan. Someone in the office has suggested that we just have a meetup and just post it on our blog. And so I did that, and 2 people came to the first meetup in New York. And we met in a small cafe and sat around this tiny little coffee table and had a really wonderful conversation. They had all sorts of ideas. They were clearly very early and enthusiastic adopters of the service. And I did one about a year ago in New York, and 1,000 people came to it. Not everybody could get in. But these events are incredible opportunities to connect kind of at a human level with our listeners. And I think one of the ironies of the web today, and communication in particular, is we have all of these ways to communicate. Facebook, Twitter, email, all these methods. And so we're, in some way we're more connected, but in another way I think we're very disconnected. And there's nothing, I think nothing remains as powerful as an in-person interaction with people. I remember this actually town hall meeting very clearly. The fellow in the front row there with the white pants on, he was a very gregarious participant in this town hall meeting. And he was very excited about Pandora because on Pandora, he was listening to a marching band music that he had played when he was in the Navy band in World War II. And he was really fired up about it and was talking about pieces he had heard that he'd never heard before, pieces he had performed when he was younger. And it occurred to me, I kind of realized over the course of the evening that he thought Pandora was a marching band music radio station. He had no idea we had anything else in our collection. You could see him looking around when people were talking about, country and rock and stuff. He's like, am I at the wrong meeting or something? And to me, that sort of encapsulated exactly what we're trying to be about. The service was so personalized, he didn't even know that our collection expanded beyond the kind of stuff that he liked. So when he came to Pandora, he heard music that reflected his preferences. And we actually have a principle inside the company that says, we will talk to you knowledgeably and sincerely about the music you've told us you love. And I think increasingly, that is the expectation that people have of all media. I don't think that it's sufficient anymore to deliver, except in some narrow cases, sort of a broadcast stream of stuff that a consumer on their end has to curate themselves. You need a system that understands and speaks to the individual preferences of each listener. And I think you need, as a brand or as a company, to also communicate and interact with them in an equally personal way. So those two kind of tenets on the product side and on the communication side are sort of the pillars of our, how we approach personalization. And this service has clearly, I think, struck a chord, no pun intended, with listeners. I think that there's an enormous unmet need in the population for a better way to experience music. And so Pandora, as Steve mentioned, we recently announced that we had crossed over 125 million registered listeners in the US. That's been done without any advertising. So it's really entirely a word-of-mouth phenomenon. And that growth has been fueled by technology. So when Pandora launched in the fall of 2005, we grew pretty fast, pretty quickly. I think within a matter of weeks, we were adding 15, 20,000 new listeners a day, and that rose to 25, 30,000 a day. And then in the summer of 2007, we launched Pandora. We were there the day the iPhone App Store launched. And overnight, our growth rate doubled. So just on that one device, the number of new listeners coming to Pandora doubled. And I think the iPhone did two things. The first one is, obviously, it dramatically accelerated the sort of viral velocity of the audience growth on Pandora. It was just such a great tool. People could have Pandora, and someone said, what are you listening to? They could show them the app, and it obviously stimulated a lot of growth. But I think that it also changed in the minds of consumers, perhaps more importantly, their sort of personal definition of what Pandora was. I think if you'd asked people pre-iPhone what Pandora is, they would have said it's computer radio. And in fact, if you looked at our usage in the first couple of years before the iPhone came along, we were essentially a computer-based sort of laptop, desktop product. And you could see it in our bandwidth usage. From 9 to 5 was Pandora listening hours. And actually at like 9 a.m. East Coast time, our bandwidth curve would spike. And it would stay pretty steady all day long, and at 5 p.m. West Coast time, it would drop off a cliff. And if there was a holiday, very little listening on Pandora. We knew when America was working. And then when we launched on the iPhone, that curve began to flatten out. And believe it or not now, Friday and Saturday are Pandora's heaviest listening days of the week. And what's driving that is technology. So once the iPhone launched, it sort of created a domino effect. And we began to get embedded in more and more devices, obviously other smartphones, the Android platform, which is a really big one for us, the BlackBerry, connected TVs, Blu-ray players, set-top boxes, even now a Samsung refrigerator. is equipped with Pandora. Essentially, any device that is web connected and has some kind of audio output is sort of a candidate for it. And that's allowed the service to sort of find its way into kind of every nook and cranny of listening, anywhere that people historically would have listened to broadcast radio. And that means that sort of finally we're able to go up against broadcast across sort of using the whole field, including automobiles. So we now have a collection of car companies and aftermarket manufacturers who have embedded versions of Pandora. And actually, for me personally, one of the real sort of moments, sort of a bit of an epiphany for me, was the first time I used Pandora in a car. I share a car with my wife, so I don't have a car, basically. And so Pandora had been out on smartphones for about a year before I actually got in a car and used it. And I had heard about people using it in a car, and most people, and that remains true today, use it by just taking a smartphone and just plugging it into the dashboard and streaming it through their stereo system. And so I'd heard about it, and people were saying how great it was and so on, but I'd never tried it. And so the first time I used it, I got in my car, took out my iPhone, launched a station, and I had a little $2 adapter. I plugged it into the dashboard and set it down between the front seats and went driving off down the highway. Then about 15 or 20 minutes later, I was driving along, and I just thought to myself, man, this radio station is just nailing it for me. You know, it's like it knows who I am or something. And I had forgotten that I was listening to Pandora. And in that moment, I realized it was almost like cognitive dissonance. I was in a car listening to radio, and it was radio. So it wasn't my collection. I didn't know what was coming next. It was coming out of my speakers. It just felt and sounded like radio. But a song would end, and I'd go, God, I love that song. And then another one would come along that I also liked. I'm like, wow, I love that one too. And then a third one. And it was such an unfamiliar experience for me. But it really, I think, brought home to me how sort of profound the sort of combination of a personalized listening experience and mobility is. That you can take this pipe, this personalized pipe, with you everywhere now. And I think that you know, certainly as we deploy more into cars, which takes a little bit longer than consumer electronics devices, the sort of seeds are being sown to take internet radio, and of course I speak as Pandora, but also as a representative of an industry, to take internet radio really out into the mainstream across sort of the entire gamut of listening. So technology has been a huge fuel for the company's growth. And to give you an idea now, the numbers in internet radio, and I will put up some Pandora numbers here in honor of the research part of this conference. These are the numbers that I know, but we are part of obviously a larger industry, but they're pretty substantial. We're now on over 500 devices and 23 auto partners. Our 125 million plus listeners have created almost 2.5 billion stations. And there's more listening of music on Pandora than video viewing on YouTube on an hour's basis. And some data on engagement. In any given month, we stream over 14 billion songs, get 750,000 thumb interactions, and the average listener listens 19 hours in a month. And this is an area where I think it gets really interesting and where we really, I think, come head to head with the traditional broadcast radio industry, which is what this looks like on a local level now. So one of the things that we obviously can do is have sort of a geographic sense of our listeners. When you register for Pandora, one of the fields you enter is your zip code. We also can look at IP address. So Pandora now is one of, if not the largest radio station in every radio market in the US. And that's essentially an apples-to-apples comparison. This map here shows what's called our AQH, I'm sure everybody knows average quarter-hour measurement, which is sort of the currency of broadcast radio in these various markets here. For those who aren't familiar with radio, the largest stations in any given market typically boast about a 1 share. So these numbers in the last couple of years have doubled every year. And Pandora's growth is really continuing unabated. So this medium, this personalized medium, is not only kind of a big national layer across the country, but now at a local level, it's a very substantial presence, and it's growing very, very fast. And this capability, the characteristic of being able to target locally means that from an advertising standpoint, we can act like a local radio station. So Pandora has a large but very fast-growing team of local advertisers who are knocking on local doors and soliciting business from folks who have traditionally advertised exclusively on broadcast radio. So forgive the sort of small visual here, but this is a local Honda dealer in New Jersey, one of the largest in the country, has moved a substantial part of their budget into Pandora, and they're advertising sort of on multi-platform. So this medium allows you not only to deliver traditional audio spots, which we do, but to link them to visual, video, sort of calls to action, really kind of interesting, somewhat more complex, but I think far more effective advertising products that have been historically in the hands of radio. In fact, I'd say one of our biggest challenges as a business has been just sort of educating and working with the existing infrastructure of radio buying. We've come to call ourselves KPAN when we go into sales calls now, and we're trying to develop a currency where you can buy from internet radio and it looks and feels just like buying from broadcast radio. So we are really beginning to carve out a substantial space in this category, and a growing % of our revenue is coming from traditionally local broadcast radio buyers. The beauty of targeting, of course, is that you can parse and triage your advertising campaign. So we run typically around 1,400 different campaigns a week on Pandora. And because we're geo-targeting, demo-targeting, you can target, women in their 30s listening to punk music in the New York City metropolitan area and hit only them. So it's a very powerful medium for that. There's also a dimension to this that is particularly near and dear to me, which is our ability to sort of activate at a local level with music. So we have a pretty good idea of what Americans are listening to, what they like, and where they are. And we have the ability to communicate with them. So it's not that difficult for us to target alerts or events based on someone's musical taste. And we've begun to do that where we'll actually set up a concert, and we've done this a handful of times sort of as we sort of figure out the methodology for it. About a year ago, we did a show with Amy Mann, who's a singer-songwriter, at the Largo Club in Los Angeles. And we invited listeners who had thumbed up an Amy Mann song and lived within driving distance of the Largo to an event at the Largo, and filled the place on a Tuesday night with Amy Mann fans. She was really happy with that show, and her manager asked if we could do it for the rest of her tour. And the club owner said, hey, can I do this for the rest of my shows this year at my club? I've got however many, 70, 100 shows the rest of the year, and I can't possibly fund any kind of advertising campaign, but this is just technology kind of connecting the dots. It's not hard to imagine a feature on Pandora where a band logs in and looks up on a map where its fans are, and then just plots the tour bus accordingly. And that as they come to each town, a week or two before they get there, the local listening audience gets an alert that they're coming. And in our case, what we've done now also is sort of create opportunities where brands participate. So it's an event that's sponsored by a brand that has local fans. You source a band that has an enthusiastic local audience full of thumbs up, and you can kind of put together, I think, really interesting events that wouldn't have been possible before, that sort of personalized radio creates as an opportunity. So stepping back, this space, once again, radio, which is an absolutely enormous category. It's 16 plus hours a week. It's of music. 80% of that is radio. It's our pipeline to music. It's the medium through which musicians build their careers. Is undergoing a profound transformation. And for musicians, I mentioned that we have over 90,000 artists, and they're represented by over 900,000 songs. Over 95% of those songs play every month on Pandora. So it's basically a different product. We're not talking about a playlist of 200 or 300 songs that rotates and that changes very little month to month. We're talking about, prospectively, a musician's middle class, which is what Pandora would like to build in the long run, providing exposure at scale to a wealth, sort of this layer of artists who have essentially been below the radar for their entire careers. And I think that's a really exciting prospect ahead of us. So that's kind of the thoughts I want to share with you today. I'm happy to take any questions. I understand there are mics floating around out there. I guess they're on the sides. If anybody has a question, yeah. You want to shout it?
More of a comment, because I don't know when I'll be able to interact with you one-on-one. So first of all, I want to say thank you for creating Pandora.
Can you put it close to your mouth?
Yes, I can. Thank you for creating Pandora. And I probably speak for many, many millions, obviously. But here's the thing, though. In our household, my daughter is 9, and she listens to Pandora, and it's Taylor Swift all the time. I listen to Pandora, it's Michael Jackson all the time. And my wife listens to Pandora, and it's Hindi popular music. So the question for you is, as you think about Pandora, how does it play in the global space?
I'm sorry, how does it what?
How does it play in the global space? So, or do you have plans for even going there, or do you just think it'll organically grow across the globe?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Pandora is not legal outside the U.S. right now, and that has to do with licenses. In the U.S., we operate under a piece of federal legislation that gives us permission to do what we do. Essentially, it's very straightforward. There is no proxy for that anywhere else. When we first launched Pandora, for the first 18 months, before we began blocking listeners, it was growing like a weed all over the world, at a time when our catalog was pretty much exclusively English language, so we weren't even prepared for it. All you needed to do to log on was pretend you were a US resident and type in a US zip code, and you could get access to Pandora. Our most popular zip code in the first 18 months was 90210 on Pandora. It is absolutely our vision and mission, and it will come to pass eventually that we'll be available around the world. It's just a matter of negotiating what are currently pretty primitive rights structures and convincing them that this is a good thing. Unfortunately, I think the way licensing works, the artists don't have much control over how the licenses are administered. And so I think their interests don't really get generally represented. The day we blocked our listeners overseas, which was just a horrifying day for us, we shut off, I don't know, 5 or 6 million people around the world. I got an email from somebody who was living in Yugoslavia, and he was very depressed. And he lived in this very small village. He told this story. He said, I live in a small town. There are about 300 people live here and lives in the mountains. And for the past 6 months, every Saturday, all the villagers had collected in the one town nightclub for Pandora Night. And it had become kind of the social event of the week for the town. And they were just saddened by the fact that it had been cut off. And music is this incredibly universal thing. It needs no translation. So it gives me gray hair that we are not able to do it yet, but it'll happen eventually. I feel like it's just inevitable. Yeah. Yeah, do I follow the microphone? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about advertising on Pandora. I most often listen when I'm with my 18-year-old son. We have common interest in music, fortunately.
Right.
And there's an advertisement for a local car dealer that seems to be the only ad that plays. And it plays, it seems, every 10, 15 minutes. To the point that my son says, when I buy a car, I'll never buy it from there. What is the state of your system for serving up ads to make sure you get the right balance in terms of frequency of play?
Well, we know your car is really old, so we've been. So what you're experiencing is an artifact of kind of a young local business, which means the sort of diversity of our advertisers is not where it's going to be. And that means that you sometimes get a glut of a given advertiser. But that's just kind of a logical step on the path to being much more diversified, to where for your demo, your location, your listening habits, and so on, we'll have a bigger palette of advertisers to choose from. So we're on our way there, and that number, that 1,400 number that I mentioned, is growing. I just think it's a matter of time. I love that you're listening with your son. That's really, that's great. I don't know, where's the microphone? Oh, right there. Okay, sorry.
So since this is the ARF, I thought it was really interesting how you're doing the town halls as a customer listening event. How else are you using research or consumer insights in general, and specifically as you look at competitive threats from people like Spotify, et cetera?
Yeah, so really our primary measurement of our sort of success as a product is the duration of listening. So how long are listening sessions, and over what period of time does a listener stay with Pandora? That's kind of really the one way for us to measure success. And so we are in a continual process of watching that number. And everything that we do, whether it's adding an audio ad or making a change to the playlist algorithm, making a feature change, something to do with the user experience, we are constantly A/B-ing everything that we do to see how it impacts the session length, essentially. And over time, that has continued to grow. So there are a myriad number of ways in which we impact that, but none is as impactful as improving the playlist. We have a sort of a saying that it's the playlist stupid within Pandora, because that's really the primary driver of sort of the product adoption. In terms of competition, back to what I mentioned earlier, most of the activity and innovation is going on in that adjacent 20% of music listening, which historically has not competed with radio. I think that for all of us, it's maybe a little counterintuitive, but those are two different modes of listening. And iTunes, Rhapsody, Spotify has released a great product in that arena. We've seen no impact on our growth at all from any of those services at any point in our trajectory. So our principal competition is Clear Channel. And that's where our listener hours are going to come from. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been waiting to talk to someone from Pandora. I'm a big user of Pandora. Here's my dilemma. All right? You have very sophisticated playlist algorithms. I've explained to my wife how this works. She loves Pandora too, okay? So every time I listen to Pandora, ads come up for dating services. How is it that a man of my age, who is happily married, who you know so much about the musical taste of, is being fed ads for dating services? How do I explain this to my wife?
I don't want to go into that territory. Certainly, there's an appetite among advertisers to have more information about our users. I think one of the areas of debate for us, and I think debate more broadly for advertising, is, what level of information will people provide, and can you kind of subsume into your advertising machine? For example, are you single? Do you have kids? How much do you make? Do you buy cars? Do you rent movies? All those kinds of things. And to date, we have a sort of a relatively thin layer of data about you. We know your age, gender, zip code, and the style of music that you listen to. Can we extrapolate from that whether you're happily married or not? Probably tough to do that. We do some musicologically based inferences, but I wouldn't say that's kind of central to our advertising platform. So it's certainly not a personal comment on your personal life that you get dating advertisements. But I'm happy to personally remove those from your radio station to make your wife happy, so you don't have to explain anything to your wife. Yeah, way in the back there.
Question. One impediment to using radio in the home used to be you had to hook your computer up to your stereo, which has been solved recently by Pandora rated devices. Is there a similar solution for cars?
Yeah, so in the cars, the sort of chapter one of Pandora in the car, or internet radio in the car, is the smartphone as your sort of means of bringing it into the system. And the cars are their role right now is to build software into the dashboard that detects the phone, either through a Bluetooth connection or a wired connection, and then brings those controls into the dashboard UI. And that's what all of our implementations do in one form or another. In some cases, like Ford, it's actually voice activated. So you can command Pandora using voice controls. That's stage one. Stage two, and I wouldn't even want to put a timeline on this, is when a car has its own internet, its own data plan, and you're just using Pandora in a car without a smartphone at all. But for now, and for the foreseeable future, I think smartphones will be the principal driver of adoption into the car. Yeah. Yeah, right in the back there. Okay, I'm just going to tell one last story, and then I'll get off the stage for you. A little while ago, I got an email from a listener, and he was very, very unhappy. And he said, "I'm really pissed off at you, Tim. You played a Celine Dion song on my Sarah McLachlan station." And it was a he, I remember. And so I wrote back to him and I said, "Well, did it not really fit musically? Sometimes we make mistakes, and maybe we had an error in the music genome analysis." And he wrote back and he said, "No, it kind of fits, but it was Celine Dion, man. I hate Celine Dion." So I wrote back again and I said, "Well, was it the set? Could we play songs in 3 or 4 song sets? And maybe the flow wasn't right, or it didn't kind of work with that block of songs." And he said, "No, it actually kind of worked with the sets, but it was Celine Dion. And she plays in Vegas." And then I tried one more thing, and I said, "Okay, was it the transitions? Was it the way the songs before and after kind of segue together?" And he said, "No, the segues were actually quite smooth. That all worked, but it was Celine Dion. I'm really pissed off about it." So we had a few more back and forth, and then his last email to me was, "Oh my God, I like Celine Dion." So I like to think of one of Pandora's noble objectives is to breaking down all of your stereotypes about these various artists so you can appreciate them for the musicology of their recordings. So thank you very much.